The world's manufacturing crown is being passed, but it's not going where you think. While everyone watched the trade wars, Vietnam quietly moved from being China's backup to the world's primary high-tech engine. How did a nation once known for textiles suddenly become the global epicenter for semiconductor assembly? In the last decade, some of the biggest companies on Earth began making a silent shift. Factories once locked inside China started appearing across Vietnam. Apple suppliers moved in. Samsung doubled down. Intel expanded. Nvidia started building strategic alliances. And suddenly, Vietnam wasn't just making shoes and cheap clothing anymore. It was manufacturing the future. But this story is bigger than economics, because behind this transformation lies a hidden global power struggle involving China, the United States, artificial intelligence, semiconductors, and the terrifying realization that the world may no longer trust a single country to build everything it depends on. So how did Vietnam pull this off? And why are billion-dollar corporations betting that this small Southeast Asian nation could become the next manufacturing superpower of the 21st century? This is the hidden reality behind Vietnam's rise. For over 30 years, China dominated global manufacturing like no nation in modern history. If you bought a phone, it probably came from China. A laptop? China. Furniture? China. Electronics, toys, industrial equipment, batteries, machinery. China became the factory of the planet. Its infrastructure was unmatched. Its labor force was massive. Its ports operated like machines. And its manufacturing ecosystem became so advanced that entire cities specialized in producing single components. No country could compete. But then something changed. Actually, several things changed at once. First came rising labor costs. Chinese workers were no longer as cheap as they used to be. Factory wages climbed rapidly as China became wealthier. Then came the US-China trade war. Tariffs exploded across global supply chains. Companies suddenly realized something dangerous. They had become too dependent on China. One political conflict, one lockdown, one disruption, and entire industries could collapse overnight. And then COVID happened. When China shut down factories during lockdowns, the world experienced shortages on a scale few had imagined possible. Cars couldn't be completed because of missing chips. Electronics disappeared from shelves. Shipping routes froze. Global corporations panicked. That's when executives began searching for something they once believed impossible, an alternative to China. And hidden in Southeast Asia, Vietnam was waiting. Vietnam didn't become powerful overnight. For years, the country quietly prepared itself while the world ignored it. Its government aggressively invested in manufacturing infrastructure. Ports improved. Industrial parks expanded. Roads, logistics, energy systems, all modernized with one goal: attract global industry. But Vietnam had another advantage: geography. It sits directly beside China. That meant companies could relocate factories without completely rebuilding their supply chains. Manufacturers could still source materials from Chinese suppliers while assembling products in Vietnam. This became the perfect China Plus One strategy. Keep some operations in China, but move critical manufacturing elsewhere, and Vietnam became the biggest winner. Then came the labor advantage. Vietnam offered significantly lower wages than China, while maintaining a highly disciplined workforce. Its population was young, ambitious, and increasingly skilled in technical manufacturing. Suddenly, multinational corporations saw something extraordinary. A politically stable country, with cheap labor, growing infrastructure, strong trade relationships, and direct access to Asian supply chains. It was almost the perfect manufacturing storm, and the floodgates opened. At first, many people thought Vietnam would only handle low-end production, shoes, basic electronics, textiles, but then the tech giants arrived. Samsung invested billions into Vietnam and eventually turned the country into one of its largest smartphone manufacturing hubs in the world. Today, a huge percentage of Samsung phones are produced there. Then Apple suppliers started moving operations. AirPods, iPads, MacBook components. Factories tied to Apple's ecosystem began spreading across Vietnamese industrial zones. Intel expanded semiconductor assembly operations. And this is where things become extremely important, because semiconductors are not just another industry. They are the backbone of modern civilization. AI systems, military technology, smartphones, cloud computing, electric vehicles, advanced weapons. Whoever controls semiconductor supply chains controls the future, and Vietnam quietly positioned itself inside that future. Not necessarily by manufacturing the most advanced chips like Taiwan, yet, but by becoming essential to semiconductor packaging, assembly, testing, and electronics manufacturing. This is the hidden layer most people miss. The world doesn't just need chip designers. It needs entire ecosystems that can support advanced technology production at scale. Vietnam is becoming one of those ecosystems, and global corporations know it. That's why investment is exploding. Because this isn't simply about replacing factories. It's about building the next strategic center of global technology. The rise of Vietnam is also deeply connected to one thing: America's fear of losing technological dominance. For years, the United States depended heavily on Chinese manufacturing. But as tensions between both superpowers increased, Washington realized something dangerous. China controlled too much of the global supply chain. From electronics to rare earth processing to industrial manufacturing, the dependency became a national security issue. That's why the US began encouraging companies to diversify production away from China. Not necessarily abandon China completely, but reduce dependence. Vietnam became one of the safest bets. Why? Because unlike some nations, Vietnam managed a delicate balancing act. It maintained economic relationships with China while also strengthening partnerships with the United States, Japan, South Korea, and Western corporations. This made Vietnam strategically valuable. And there's another reason America is paying close attention: artificial intelligence. The AI boom is triggering an enormous demand for electronics, chips, servers, and advanced manufacturing capacity. The world needs more production centers. Fast. Vietnam is rapidly positioning itself to become one of the critical hubs powering the AI era. And in geopolitics, timing is everything. But here's the part most headlines ignore. Vietnam's rise is impressive, but replacing China completely may be impossible. Because China's manufacturing ecosystem is still on another level. China has deeper infrastructure, more advanced industrial networks, faster logistics, massive automation capabilities, and one of the most complete supply chains in human history. Vietnam cannot instantly replicate that. In fact, many Vietnamese factories still depend heavily on Chinese raw materials and components, which means something fascinating is happening. Vietnam isn't fully replacing China. It's becoming part of a new manufacturing map where production is spread across multiple countries instead of concentrated in one superpower. And there are challenges ahead. Vietnam's infrastructure is under pressure from rapid growth. Electricity demand is surging. Skilled labor shortages are emerging in high-tech sectors. And if wages rise too quickly, the same advantage Vietnam enjoys today could eventually disappear. Then there's geopolitics. Vietnam sits in a very delicate position between major powers. If tensions between China and the United States escalate further, maintaining neutrality could become increasingly difficult. So, while Vietnam's rise looks unstoppable right now, the future remains uncertain. But perhaps that uncertainty is exactly why the world is betting on diversification in the first place. For decades, globalization concentrated manufacturing into one dominant engine, China. But the future may look very different. Instead of one manufacturing superpower, the world may be entering an era of distributed production. China, Vietnam, India, Mexico, Indonesia. Multiple nations sharing pieces of the global supply chain. And Vietnam is emerging as one of the biggest winners of that transformation. Not because it defeated China, but because the world no longer wants to depend entirely on any single country. That's the deeper reality here. Vietnam's rise is not just an economic story. It's a signal that the architecture of global power is changing, quietly, strategically, and faster than most people realize. The next smartphone you buy, the next AI system you use, the next semiconductor powering the digital world, there's an increasing chance part of it will come from Vietnam. And while headlines remain focused on superpower conflicts, a quieter revolution is unfolding behind factory walls across Southeast Asia. The question is no longer whether Vietnam matters. The real question is, could this small nation become one of the most important technological battlegrounds of the 21st century? Because the future of global manufacturing may already be shifting beneath our feet, and most of the world still hasn't noticed. If this video changed the way you see the global economy, make sure you like, share, and subscribe to Hidden Realities for more hidden truths shaping the future of our world. Because the biggest shifts on Earth are usually the ones happening silently.